Okay, I did. Yeah, I started, and because I'm recording by myself and I'm not live streaming, I forgot to unmute myself. I'm going to do that a bunch. You can't be a VTuber without having stuff, right? Okay, so what is this? What am I watching here? What am I watching here? Hey yo, hey, all right. This is episode 0 of my podcast, Origin Stories. I had the idea for this podcast actually probably about 6 years ago. And the reality is I keep telling my friends that, oh yeah, I had this idea 2 years ago when I started VTubing. I had this idea, this many times. Like, I actually had this idea a long time ago. And I've been sitting on this idea till I felt like I could do it right. And I kind of came to the realization this last year that there's never going to be that perfect storm. And so I need to just get out there and start making it happen, right? Sometimes the best stuff comes from a little stuff, right? So what we're going to do today, this is not going to be the normal podcast. This is going to be what can you expect to see during Origin Stories. What can you expect to encounter? What kind of guests you're going to see? What the goal of this is about? And then I'm also going to kind of do a dry run where I talk about who I am, who Fenris Star is, and yeah, just ideas. If you do not know what the podcast is, you do not know who I am, you're going to use this as a starting point. Now, I'll probably re-record this in the future, maybe whenever I do like a re-debut or, get maybe a little more production value. I'll re-record this so that way new people coming in can kind of see what it is, and we'll talk about previous episodes. We've actually already recorded the first episode. I was supposed to record this last week, but the first episode was with my friend, fellow VTuber, and person who kind of helped me get started and figure out how do you do this VTubing thing. Caleb Steers, the Demon Emperor of Ezra and the Royal Archives. Awesome dude. I can't praise him enough. And we've actually already announced the first guest, or well, not the first guest, but the second guest, who's going to be my friend and the artist who helped me create Fenris Star, Sugargun. Sugargun has been extremely gracious with their time. They are a wonderfully creative talent mind who, I just want to support all my friends and help them grow. And at the top of the hour, throughout most of these episodes, I'm going to try not to do storytelling. It's one of those things where I myself am a storyteller. I tell stories. This is what I've done my entire life, right? But this podcast is not about me. This podcast is about creatives. It's about content creators. It's about artists. It's about people who are out there doing something that I want to elevate. I want to highlight. I want to find out their story. And that was kind of the founding bit of what pushed me to make this podcast, right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a quick run of show, what you can expect to hear during this episode of the podcast. It'll be loosely a dry run for the other episodes. I'll go through a few items, then I'll talk a little bit about who I am, and then I'll also reveal a little bit of who Fenris Star is and the story behind Fenris Star and what is Fenris Star's origin story. So typically with these, I'll start out how we did, with the screen, and we'll start talking. It'll be a little more casual, right? First 15 minutes, I'm setting up the podcast. I'll introduce the guest, try to, plug who they are, point you to where you can find them. Please go check them all out. Go follow them on where you can. And then I'll actually kick them off with the first time I asked them the question, what is your origin story? Now, this is intended to be a vague question. And it's actually, the idea with this question is, I had this idea after I saw an interview with Harrison Ford. Now, this was pre the death of Carrie Fisher. Harrison Ford has softened a lot since then because he kind of had more of a personal realization of the world and what matters, right? Harrison Ford is very much an actor that I highly respect, but throughout the time and ages, you'll see this with creators, and you'll see this with experts in their field. You'll see this with basketball players like Michael Jordan. You'll see this with martial artists. You'll see this with politicians. You'll see this whenever someone does an interview or they do a press junket, right? They usually get around to the question of, where did you get your start? Or like, if I wanted to do this, how would I get started, right? And if you watch an interview with Harrison Ford, like pre passing of Carrie Fisher, you'll see it's almost like they glaze over, right? The PR mode kicks in. And what it is they've answered that question so many times in their life. They have a canned PR answer that is, cannot be cracked. And it's partially a self-defense mechanism. It's partially just like, you've done this 1,000 times and you know exactly what to say. I've always thought about this when streaming and when meeting like other content creators. I remember being in content creators streams and seeing that question pop up of like, if I want to be a VTuber, where do I get started? I want to do streaming. Where do I get started? It's the same thing, the same reaction where, the face glazes over and the same answer starts. And I remember watching an Iron Mouse stream where she got this question. She's like, just start, just stream, turn it on, go do it. Don't worry about it. Just do it. And the idea there is like, you kind of can't worry too much about how to start. You just kind of got to start. Right. And when I think about that concept, I also think about, going back to Michael Jordan, there's many times documented where people are like, why are you so good at free throws? It's like, the true story behind that is because when he was in college, he would be in the gym for hours practicing the same shot 1,000 times. And I think it's a Bruce Lee quote where he's like, I do not fear the man who knows like 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who practiced one kick 10,000 times, right? It's because that repetition makes you better. And like, to be a better streamer, you don't get better streaming by researching how to stream, right? You get better streaming by streaming, right? You get better doing your art by doing your art, right? It's kind of this thing where me personally, I kind of want to demystify this around artists. So back to the run of show, I kind of got a little derailed there. I really want to start out with that question of just kind of like getting that question out there. So anyone who has like the default response, that glaze over, gets it out. Right. And then that's when I go into questions that I've prepared. Right. And I actually, looked at a lot of like how, First We Feast, Hot Ones does their questioning. I've looked at like a bunch of other people, how they do their questioning. I'm kind of like, okay, there's definitely topics and themes, and you ratchet up. You don't hit them, with a quick sucker punch. No, you slowly kind of build that up. Right. And this is a skill that I'm going to try to develop over time. So I need to take myself out of the equation. And I thought it would be great for like anyone who's my guests, anyone who, is watching, to get those bits of who me are out here in this episode 0. So I'll go through, I'll do questions, and then I've developed this mini game I'm calling Shake or Shake, where essentially what I want to do is introduce topics, right? And these could be posed as like just more questions, but like it's kind of one of those things where like there could be current events. It could be like, a lot of people love doing the smash or pass, or the cake thing, or, there's a lot of these different variations of this thing. And I feel like this could be our thing where, I introduce a topic and you shake on it. It's like, yes, I agree. That's great. Or you shame on it and you say why, right? And already testing this out with Caleb in the first episode, this works. This is doing exactly what I want. And it's a great stimulant to help them talk, to help my guests kind of like open up and, let out who they are. Right. Because it gives them a topic to think about, talk about. Right. So, which kind of leads to the next segment. The next segment is going to be viewer submitted questions. Now, I want to do this 2 weeks before. It looks like realistically a week before and up through the show. I'm going to have a Google form available. And what that is going to be is an opportunity for any viewers who can't make it during the live recording, or like people who, are watching live. It's an opportunity for them to submit questions to, my guests, to the content creator, to the artist, to, whoever I have on the show. And I think this is very important because it's questions from a different perspective, right? So many people watch them in different ways. They might see their art in different places. And I think this is just a good practice, right? I think it kind of opens up and be honest. So it's like, it's not me just, putting it out there and being like, hey, this is my agenda of these questions. No. This is about the guests. This is absolutely about the guests and who they are. And that's why after all these questions, right, and after we get through and we talk, and my goal is to have this be about an hour, and Caleb's episode ended up being about 2.5 to 3 hours. And I'm like, maybe this is a 2-hour podcast, but I'm going to let it kind of breathe and each episode be its own unique beast because it reflects, the guests that I pull on. It's about highlighting that guest, right? So we're going to end each episode by re-asking that question, what is your origin story? And if you go and watch the first episode, which I'm going to post immediately after this, you'll see how Caleb did an amazing job. I asked Caleb the question first. They did a great job. We had a blast talking about all these different topics. And then when given the question as what is your origin story, the response was very strong. And it felt like a very good, reflection of who Caleb is as a content creator. And I love that. I feel like I captured that. And I hope that as people watch that episode, that they're like, oh man, this is a good person. This is a cool dude. I should watch this person, and, we'll end by replugging and, doing sign off and all that. But format is something that I want to evolve and I want to grow and I want to change over time. And, part of this that's going to be the hardest part for me is finding guests outside of my immediate reach, my immediate social circle, right? I want to focus more on independent artists, independent content creators. I want to focus on that, that individual who has, practiced that one kit 10,000 times, right? So one thing I'm going to have, and, I'll have this in the comments on this video. I'll try to have it on the comments of every video and pinned. I'm going to have a form that is where you can submit recommended guests. And if I see someone like Spike, or I see someone that, I can get a hold of, or I can reach out to, and the schedules work, I want to bring people that I don't know onto the show. Because with bringing people that I know it makes making questions really easy. People that I don't know, I'm going to have to do my homework. And this is going to be a new skill for me to develop, which probably is a good way to segue into who I am. Now, if you watch my streams, I'm a pretty private person, which is why I chose to be a VTuber, right? Originally, I was a Facecam streamer, and I actually started streaming back in the DayZ mod days. I streamed for about half a year, and I was part of a few different communities. My CCV, I think, was 30 to 45 at the time. And had I kept doing it, I probably would have been much bigger than I was. But what ended up happening was my GPU died. My GPU died, and I was at a point financially where I couldn't just replace that. So I had to go back to an old one that couldn't handle streaming. And it took me about a year before I could get a new one. And I had lost the spark, right? At that time, I was a moderator for a friend. And I went through a lot of personal stuff in my life that, at some point I'll probably talk about publicly, because I feel like sharing personal struggles and personal stories is a way to actually help other people. Because if they're going through the same story and the same struggle, they will see that, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, this is not just me. Oh, this happens to other people, right? And kind of normalizes it. And once you're at that point where something has been more or less a struggle has been normalized, that's when you can start taking steps to go beyond it, right? I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I can't give official advice, but this has just kind of been my practice, and what one thing I've learned as a streamer to do, right? It's there's a lot of streamers who are like, oh yeah, don't trauma dump in my stream. It's well, okay. A lot of the original thought behind that is more or less about the the view of the entire community, right? It's like you have to think about your community as a whole. So, before I dig deeper into me, I also have a set of ground rules that I forgot to bring up. And this is kind of lifting the current. This is something that, every guest is going to get a primer that, is like, who am I? Who is Fenris Star? What is the podcast? How do you set up what options are available? But there's a set of ground rules that, it's like the first rule is about the guests. It's like, you should be comfortable and have fun. Please communicate anything you need. The second rule is that if you'd like to move on from a topic, subject, question, we will move on. No questions asked. The first two rules are about helping that guests feel comfortable, but also like, maintaining a certain level of decorum, right? The following questions are kind of just more, or following ground rules are kind of more along that line, right? But the whole goal of this podcast is to highlight the creator and to more or less, learn their story and share their story and get that out there. So anything that like kind of like inhibits or paints that in a negative light, I want to get away from that. There's so much negative sensational media. You can watch a video from Chris Broad, someone I admire and respect, just posted a video about the sensationalism going on with, Japanese, people who go to Japan to talk about, Japanese like events going on. I don't want to say trauma, but like, it's like, oh yeah, this one place is like terrible. It's like it's sensationalist media. It's very negative. It's very clickbaity, and that's it's not founded. That's what's going on, especially with the algorithm. The algorithm rewards that. So I very much want this podcast to be a positive piece of content that is putting good back in the world. And I don't care if this takes off or not. I just want these individual stories put out there and highlighted, right? Unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to make things PG-13. Swearing, I swear like a sailor. So that's going to be unavoidable. We're going to try to avoid religion, world events, and politics, just because those things can, make communities and audience that can alienate them. Because some people, like, you can't just like cut off a family member. It might be your parent, it might be someone you live with, right? Who is, essentially being misdirected by these negative things. I want that to be well known that is, a ground rule here. Stream is LGBTQA. It's like I want everyone to feel welcome and safe. Subjects such as mental health, I want to be sensitive and mindful about those. And then I have rules about like, it's like if for some reason you want the VOD taken down or you want something edited, done, no questions asked. So if you ever see an episode disappear, please don't worry about it. Don't think about it. It's probably just being edited, right? It's probably something that, may have accidentally dot something, is being removed, right? That is just kind of the ground. So now that I've kind of like gotten all that out of the way, who am I? Who am I? So I've already touched on like, who am I, what my origins are streaming, right? But it's always hard to explain myself because I'm a very private person. I'm also pretty humble in some ways. I feel weird saying that, but like it's one of those things where I've kind of lived a hard life in a lot of ways. The way I explain what my career is, I typically call myself a creative producer, and what that means is I've done creative content production for brands large and small in a variety of different roles, right? In one place I might be a creative director, right? At one place I might be a digital content producer. I might be a creative manager. I might be the designer themselves actually doing the work. Because of this, I've worked for a lot of brands like, Nike, Blizzard, fashion brands. I've worked for agencies, big and small. And it's one of those things where in my career, in my life, I've seen creatives used, abused, and thrown out the door. It's really hard for creatives to, because of the way NDAs are formed, to be like, oh, that's my work, right? You can actively say, I made that, but there's a dangerous line of being like, oh, hey, that's my work. because you typically have to sign away your ownership of that work to whoever you work for. And that's kind of something that has plagued artists and creatives. And, it's another fuel for me to actually make this podcast right now because of what I'm seeing happening with generative AI, where artists and creatives are essentially being dehumanized by those who have a business and invested interest. And it's to the point where, you could try to argue that it's like, oh, the artists are just greedy of it. And it's like, no, this is their livelihood. This is their work. And the way that they're being like, their work is just being abused and taken advantage of it's horrendous. And it's something that me personally, I've seen how my work, it's like you might be like, oh yeah, well, how far has your work reached? If you're above the age of 15, there's probably a 90% chance you've seen something I made. That is a fact. And you might be like, oh, but I live in Germany. I probably haven't. I've localized content into 23 different languages, into many locales. There's a very high chance that something you've worked on, or I've worked on, you've seen. And is it a disservice to me that people don't know who I am? I kind of like being the secret weapon in the most place, but like, it's one of those things where like my life's work has recently been more dismissed and thrown away and used against me, because I've become overqualified. Right. And what has happened in basically the corporate world, and this is worldwide, is a lot of people like myself and even people who are just starting out their career can't get work because of this perception that, generative AI is superior, when it's like, me personally being in the workplace and seeing how it's worked creatively, it's definitely does not. There are some questions answered, and I would point you to Jazza. Jazza is a YouTuber who has done creative work, and Jazza put out a very great video on, both sides of the argument and what is a more conversational approach to it. I personally do not agree with and think ethically generative AI should not exist, being a creative. But I've seen how in the workplace there are questions that are answered, but there's also a lot of ethical problems with it. And as it stands, it should be stopped. As it currently stands, it should be stopped. Is there a way where, I've heard a lot of people say the genie's out of the bottle. Is there a way where it could be effective? Yes, there is. No one is pushing that agenda forward because everyone is so focused on profitability. And it sucks. It sucks so much. I just like, it feels like no one's looking at this with a level head because everyone wants to spread misinformation and clickbait, and they want to dehumanize creative. So that's kind of a secondary objective of this, is to humanize the creatives behind the work. Origin Stories is very much going to reflect on who the person is who's done creative work. So if I get an artist who, maybe they did the cover art for the latest anime, right? I want people to get an idea of who this person is and the effort that went into making that, right? And that's the stories that aren't being told right now. Those stories are getting suppressed because it's not convenient to the business types who invested how many millions of dollars on these projects, right? How much millions of dollars have been invested in these projects? It's ridiculous. So at a top level, that's kind of who I am, right? I have about 2 decades of experience doing creative production. And I've made it part of Fenris's identity that my real name is Zach, CH, please. I decided to do that with Fenris when I created Fenris because when I streamed originally, I streamed as an acronym that used my real name. This was before swatting was a thing. So, the knowledge that, that might be dangerous was not there. Shout out to people who from that era, Ray, Ray is one of those people who also was from that era where it's like, oh yeah, just use your real first name. It's like, oh no, now that's kind of dangerous. Any bit of information is potentially doxing and dangerous. And it's ridiculous how much people can, find out. It's like, oh, from this picture, I recognize that van, and that van has this marking on it. That means you're within 5 meters of this location. It's ridiculous, right? finding out people's content information, getting dots and half. It's horrible what happens to people who are just trying to create something. And, a lot of people don't realize that like all the effort that goes into streaming is at a loss. and we're kind of learning that right now too, especially with what's going on with like, Twitch failing with TwitchCon and, a lot of these people getting out. It's like, it's getting pretty obvious that like, because of the world that people like Mr. Beast have made with content creation, streaming content creation is not profitability, is a hobby first. And if you go in looking at ARWay, you're going to have a bad time. That's just facts. Yeah. So me, I'm Zach. I'm a creative producer, with 20 years experience. I've done a lot of stuff. I've worked on a lot of different things, and my hobby and my passion is around streaming and content creation. It's what I do for fun. I've been in a lot of roles where sometimes I've been just a manager and I don't touch creative work. And it's just, everyone needs a way of self-expression. And that's kind of what brings me to Fenris, right? And Fenris Star. So Fenris Star is a kind of a weird name, right? Fenris Star originally was going to be inspired by Destiny. The original concept and design for Fenris was actually a Destiny hunter, because I played Destiny and Destiny 2 religiously for a long time. I didn't raid. I really don't like high-end raid content because I don't like what that does to individuals and communities. But I loved playing Destiny. I loved going on like weird, strange adventures where it's like, the Hawk Moon, which was the inspiration for Fenris's gun here, Hawk Moon, which I didn't want to name it, and Sugar's like, you need a name for it. I'm like, it's Wolf Moon. There, I want to refine that bit of lore a little bit later, but I do have a plan for Fenris. So how did Fenris go from a Destiny hunter to what is in front of you right now, which this is actually my 0.5 model. I never got my 1.0 model launched because of the challenges of having a specific creative vision and what is available for male VTubers in general. It kind of sucks. It really sucks. And I can't fault the artists for it because they're doing what puts food on the table. But finding someone who believes in your vision and understands what you're going for is really tough, right? And there's some wonderful, amazing talents. There's some dream riggers who I know who could see my vision. It just becomes about money at that point, right? Money and time. Like, can I invest that much money? And like, again, this is a hobby, right? So don't go in just throwing money down. Originally, I approached a specific artist. I don't want to call them out just yet because I don't know if they want that attention because they've kind of pulled back from freelancing and artist work. So I want to talk to them first before I put them out there. But they graciously gave me their time and they did some initial sketches for me and took my ideas, and they're like, this is cool and all, but I don't think this is going to work, and I don't think I'm the right artist for what you're trying to do. And I was like, okay, who do you recommend? They pointed me to Sugar, and it was one of those things where once I approached Sugar Gun like I do any client professionally, and Sugar will probably talk about this in their episode where I can be extremely formal and I can be extremely professional. And Sugar was just like, who the F is this guy? And so we started talking, we worked through it. And it was one of those things where at this time, slightly before I approached making Fenris, let's back it up. Slightly before I approached making Fenris, I lost a job. I had left a job for another job that promised me that, if they lost this contract, that I would be moved to a different project. That didn't happen. So they just told the entire team, and I was kind of out on the streets for about 6 months. And during that time, I developed bad insomnia, and I will personally develop bad insomnia time to time with how stressed I am. I found myself watching live streamers, and one of my favorite things to watch late at night was Japanese live streamers who were like, people like Retro Gaijin or Starbitsy Chan or eventually Rob CD. And I liked watching these individuals because it was a place I always wanted to go. But also these three individuals were also very respectful to the areas around them and to the culture. And I resonated with that because like me myself having like, I've spent a lot of time in Hawaii. I spent a lot of time, traveling around, right? I've been able to like integrate and blend in with cultures just by being respectful and being open-minded. And it's one of those things where like, I remember being in Hawaii and having someone actually argue with me, and they're like, "Oh, you a Hapa boy?" I'm like, "Oh no, I'm Howie." And they're like, "No, you poor Okinawan." And I'm just like, no, I'm. And what that means is I'm basically telling them that I'm white, and what Hapa means is half. And Poigi or Okinawan. Poigi is pidgin slang for Portuguese, and Okinawan is Japanese Okinawan, right? And this is a kind of common myth because Hawaii is such a melting pot of cultures. And so because of my complexion and how I look in real life, when I lived there, everyone thought I was a local boy. And it was mainly because I was just kind and respectful. And, I picked up certain lingo and he was respectful about it. And, I've traveled to New York and blended it with people there because, it's just like, I understood, what people expected. Leave me alone, be kind and respectful, and you'll get yours. I love New York. New York is a lot of fun. I want to go back. But, the whole thing with that was just like, I enjoyed watching Rob CD because they're great. And I remember having him on second monitor while I was, just kind of like, I was actually looking for jobs. And he had someone, he was like, "Okay, today I have a guest. And the first time we're doing this, I can't do a Rob voice." He had explained that he was going to have someone who was saying a bastard buddy. And she comes on and she's talking about, and at this time I didn't know about his wife, Tracy. She was talking about how she was she was like, "Oh, I'm such a D, I'm such a blah, 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 blah." Right. And I was just like, I'm listening to this girl crack jokes and be funny and be smart. And I'm just like, this girl, you're smart. You're funny. You're great. You're awesome. Who are you? Right. And I was like, let's go Rob. Right. And so eventually I looked over and what I saw was Silverman. I was like, I had never seen a VTuber at that time. I was like, what is this? What is this? I had no idea what VTubers were. And it fascinated me. And I was just like, okay, what is this? What is going on? Funny enough, at that time, it was kind of within like a week of that, I get an email, and Activision Blizzard wanted to interview me to work on Overwatch esports. Now, I shouldn't reveal that information because from that information, people can actually figure out who I am. That could dox me, right? So I'm going to be kind of light on details from that point forward. But basically, if you want to know who I am, I was the secret weapon of Overwatch esports, and one of the I would say three people who brought Path to Pro to the grand finals. It's kind of weird for me to say that because the person who hired me passed away, and this person treated me like family, and I highly respect that person. But that person had a dream. And me and the people that I worked with, we made our mission to make that dream come alive. We pushed hard to make that all happen. And, I'm trying not to tear up right now because I'm thinking about this person, how much I respected him. But yeah, that was my mission. That was my goal. And so at the same time too, one of my friends kind of got me back into streaming. So, put the pieces together. I'm streaming. I find out what VTubers are from Silvervale. From Silvervale, I found out about people like Leah Lazar, amazing streamer, VTuber. I find out about like Iron Mouse. I find out about all these different creators. I'm just like, I'm inspired, right? But I knew Blizzard's history, right? Blizzard's history with content creation and like with that sort of thing. And like, I decided I wanted to have a secret identity. I wanted to keep this secret from all of them. And a few of them know who I am now, and they know I'm a VTuber, right? So if you're one of those people who watch this, hi, I miss you guys. But point is, that brought me back to memories of my childhood. And I grew up with like Power Rangers. I grew up with Teenage Mutant Turtles. I grew up with, these stories of heroes and stuff like that. And it kind of, seeing what I was capable of, I was like, I kind of want to be a force for good in areas that matter to me. And that kind of, originally I started working with this artist on my VTuber design. And then when I switched over to Sugar, that's when it kind of all fell together. That was clear. It's like, okay, Sugar, I'm going to make you a mood board. And someday I'll reveal those mood boards, right? And I basically made a style guide for Fen, right? And I actually have a style guide for Fen 2.0. And like someday I'll probably do a video on my process for doing style guides and stuff like that, because it comes from my experience working on like, all these high-end brands, right? So I did that, and Sugar was just like, I have never had a client give me so much good stuff. And I had decided that this was the origin of Fen, and Fenris Star, this character, was going to be a vigilante. I didn't want them to be a hero, because I felt like as a vigilante, not only is there a little more freedom, but you're actually more questioning the powers that be, right? There's times when the law is, maybe being a little mishandled, maybe being a little misguided, a la Batman, and I severely was inspired by the design of Red Hood. And it was Red Hood and Superboy. So if you know those two characters and you go look at them up, you'll probably find art and you're just like, oh, that's Fen. Oh, that's Fenris. Oh, and I want to keep my gun and essentially some of the sci-fi elements around that, so that way it transitioned from Destiny to this, and Fenris was more or less born. Now, who is Fenris Star? Fenris Star is a code name. This is lore that I've given. Sugar's going to murder me flat out, because I've given Sugar like breadcrumbs, and I'm going to reveal the basis of Fenris's lore. I have this idea, and I'm going to keep this light because I do want to make a comic out of this. The idea is that in the VTubing space, there's so many people who are like, I am a demon prince. I am this. I am Fenris Star. I am this, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, what if there's a world where everyone is that? And I started thinking about the concept. This is around the time of Moon Knight. It was like, what if there's avatars of these individuals? And it's more of a, the power of the soul growing, and at some point that person, that individual, that myth, that legend, that god could be reborn. And that led me to Fenris Star. Fenris Star is an avatar of Fenris Star, who, I love Norse mythology, and the story of Fenris, or Fenrir, most commonly Fenrir, is one that I've always loved, because I hate to call out the Neil Gaiman version after Neil Gaiman was outed, but his version of Norse mythology puts a really good version of that story forward, of the relationship with Tyr, and how Fenrir was chained at the river Vanagander. I apologize for pronunciation, and more or less bites off, is kind of forced or goaded into biting off Tyr's arm, while being chained. And Tyr kind of did it willingly. It's one of those things that you can kind of interpret that scene how you want. And the way I interpret that scene is like, Tyr more or less sacrifices their arms, so that Fenrir is chained and allowed to live, versus being killed because of the prophecy of Ragnarok. Now, how's this blend into like the superhero that I've created? I used to live in Portland, and I was there during what's known as the Portland riots. Now, some people roll their eyes at using the term Portland riots, but what I hated about that, and that is also happening right now with the whole ICE issue, is that I'm highly supportive of the protesters. I consider myself a local, and I see what's going on, and it's not the protesters that are the problem, right? a lot of times it's not even the police that are the problem. They're more or less scared in a situation that they train for that they have no real experience. The problem is, now remember the story of Chris Broad and sensationalists and what works with the algorithm. The problem is the people who go to instigate and the people who go to capture media and the people who go there, because what they do is they're more or less stoking a fire, making the situation worse. And those people don't stop there. They go around, the events happening are usually in like the span of a city block, right? But they go around and they harass the town around there. I remember, being woken up at 3 a.m. because these quote unquote Proud Boys would drive through in their loud trucks, and like set off car alarms and stop at a 7-Eleven that was near where I used to live. And like, just be dicks to the people in community, because in their mind and the dialogue that they're sold is they're coming to clean up and help the people. And they're doing the exact opposite, So very much I was of the vigilante mentality of like, what if a person like myself, this is actually Fenris's origin story. What if a person like myself, right, is chosen as an avatar of a mythical creature, Fenris Ulfur, but there's an awakening that happens, right? In like there is in a lot of stories. And what happens is, as myself as a person, right, being put in that situation where you see someone in trouble and you act, and that's the moment of the awakening, right? Now that is kind of all I want to reveal of that story, because there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot of characters involved in that. And someday I have outlines, I have story, I have arcs, right? I have about 3 story arcs. I have characters like Odin is a corporation in the world, but also ran by, the avatar of Odin, and the avatar of Odin is an old woman. And I love this because there's a very important story beat, and I don't want to reveal it, that involves characters. I have an arc where, Fenris trains. I have an arc where, they come into their own, and that is Fenris Star's story. Fenris Star is a code name given to him by Odin, right? Because Odin has a plan, and the idea with Fenris Ulfur and the avatars of Fenris Ulfur, I'll reveal this story beat, is that most of them, when they awaken, are overtaken by extreme rage, right? They're overtaken, well, not rage, but they essentially go insane, right? Because, can you imagine being taken over by a giant wolf spirit, right? What happens, right? I like the idea of lunacy, right? And kicking into play and them, but the events that happens with Fen's awakening prevents it, and something goes wrong. Something goes wrong. And Odin sees that, and Odin thinks this is their opportunity to enact their plan. And that is the start of basically Fenris Star's story. He has a handler. There's other avatars from other religions, other myths, other legends, right? I want to have Amaterasu show up. There's a character that's Amaterasu. I want to have I've been researching this Spanish bull god, and I've been like, this would be such a great character. But one very important beat. Do I want to reload this? You know what? I'll throw it in there. For those of you who watched 40 minutes of this, which this was only going to be 30 minutes of this, the first big villain that Fenris fights is called Gore Rhythm. And I wanted Gore Rhythm to be basically what happens if you took the algorithm and put it into a biological computer, right? AI, it's such a cool thing. And I wanted to have like, I'm not going to reveal any more of that. That is Fenris's first big villain. And there's a lot there. That's part of the first story arc. And it's kind of, it goes on until the third story arc. I want to make this real, but it's just about time and resources and what I can do. Okay. So I've talked a lot. That's as much as I want to reveal on Fenris's backstory, their origin story. Look forward to it eventually, like once I get the time and money to make it real. I guarantee you, Sugargun, if they watch this, is probably going to yell at me and be like, "What the? You kept this secret from me?" It's like, I've shown her the outline, but I showed her a blurred version of it, so she knows how big it is and how well thought out it is. I've talked a little bit about who I am, and I guess where I'll leave off on this for episode 0. Hey, so Fenris Star here. Funny thing, I recorded the questions that were supposed to be answered here. For some reason, I lost the audio to it, so I don't want to re-record them because it doesn't feel organic. So I'm going to maybe answer those during stream or at a later time, or when we eventually do an updated version of this. So yeah, I'm so sorry. Origin stories in a summary, right? Since I'm not re-answering the "was your origin story" question. That this podcast, the goal of this podcast is to respectfully highlight creatives, artists, streamers, people who interest me, and to highlight them in a respectful, interesting manner, and to elevate them and their work and their origin story for you all to see these humans, right? To highlight them, to elevate them. And my hope is that if this keeps going and this goes where I want it to, I want to put a little good back in the world. And I want a lot of the people who look at tools like generative AI as being, oh, this is convenient, I can make art, realizing that, oh, I'm not making art, I'm taking this hard work that this person spent their life on and just throwing it in a blender for my own entertainment. I want I want these podcast episodes to reveal the person behind the mask in a respectful way that also kind of answers the question for you, the viewer. Where can I do that? I want to inspire you guys as well. I want you guys to be like, well, Zach Fenn is later in his life and he's still doing this and he's still fighting, even though by all metrics and reason and everything going on, he should quit. He should give up. He should go be a family man. I want you all to feel that no matter what your situation is, you can go and make something too. And you can see that these people who have gone and made stuff, they started right where you are. And that's something that I have to remind myself a lot constantly too. Sugar's tried teaching me art a lot of the time. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to make this massive project. Like I made the background for here. And Sugar's like, can you please start with making a circle? Can you make a goddamn circle and then make it good? And then you can take that circle, make other things. You can do it. You can make all these amazing things. And I hope that if I inspire you to do anything, that eventually you're the person I call in on this chair and I ask you the question, what's your origin story? So in short, and to wrap this up, there's the form. If you have someone you want to recommend for the podcast, I want to hear who they are. I want to reach out to them. I want to bring people who deserve to be highlighted on this show. And I want to ask them the question, what's your origin story? For now, I'm Fenris Star. I look forward to doing this more. Have a good night. Have a good day. Bye.